Hello to you, Mindfulness Collective. This right here, right now, is the Joy of Being a live stream coming to you live from Brooklyn, New York. And if you're hearing my voice, that means something is not broken. We are the opposite of broken. There we go, a little louder. I can't hear my own voice. We have a new follow from 19860. Is that that's just your social security number spelled out? Awesome. Welcome. Nice to have you here with us. I can't hear myself because I deconstructed my headphones for a great new video we're about to put out. We had to record something, and that meant I had to take my headphones apart, weirdly, for this cord. There we go. Now I can hear my own voice. Excellente. Now I want to move this. Okay, great, folks. Welcome, welcome, welcome. As always, great to see you here. Scooch the pooch. Oh, there we go. Excellent, folks. So great to see you. We have Rebecca from Sunnybrook Farms joining us here from northern Michigan. That's the upper mitten. This is the upper mitten here. I'm not sure how that. I feel like people. Yeah, it's like two mittens. Anyway, upper northern mitten. Welcome, Rebecca. Lovely to have you here. Where else are folks joining us from? Where are we finding you? Our stream ritual of letting us know where on earth you are. It's always lovely to get that sense of the geography. Janusz from Brooklyn. Good morning. Rory's coming from Ontario, but I remember you told me more. Oh, Kingston, right? It says it right there. Good morning from Vancouver. Carl, great to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us. Ned joining us from England. Ned, thank you for having us. P.S. Ned, we are streamlining the stream, just so you know, and I see that you're joining us here from England, from YouTube. You know, England, YouTube, same thing. So just so you know, we're encouraging folks to come over to our stream on twitch.tv/deepmindfulness, and that's how you'll be aware of the stream in the future. This is a transition coming soon. So let's see here. Rory, hello, Rebecca and Rory. And then Gemithicus from northern UK. Welcome. Nice to see you here. Where else are folks joining us from? We have a nice little team going here. We can get a little competition going, us versus, I don't know who we're against, but we're against somebody. They can't take us down. Awesome, folks. So what else? Where else are people joining us from? Okay, and let's see here. Oh my goodness, so many statistics to look at while I'm trying to stream. Okay, folks. So, taking a nice stretch, feeling the body, feeling what it's like to exist. Nick here joining us from Strömstad, Sweden. That's different than usual, right? Aren't you usually not in Strömstad? Jean from Brooklyn, good to have you here, as always. Very nice to have you here. And thinking, okay, so today we're going to do freestyle meditation. If you're not familiar, I like to create meditations that I've never done before. I've never experienced before, and the reason I like to do that is because the way that I guide meditation is typically I'll talk to a student and say, hey, what's going on with you? And then try to detect that experience in myself and then navigate from there to guide their experience. But that often means that I get to make it up on the spot, which is one of my favorite things versus doing it sort of from a plan. However, part of the fun of that, let's see, beautiful Nate W. from West Virginia. We have beautiful silver hair. Right. Welcome back. Nice to see you again. From Kansas. Lovely. Beep, beep, boop, 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 beep, boop. Okay, so the premise would be that we'll do freestyle meditation, but it's always helpful to know if there's anything going on for you that's of interest or confusion or difficulty, and sometimes we can work that into the meditation, not always, but sometimes, and then it's lovely. We have an opportunity to give you a meditation that's based on what you're interested in, and we're going to be answering a very specific question. On our Discord, we have a place where you can ask questions for stream, and someone left a question there that's about what is the form of meditation based on ethics that I used personally early in my sort of more significant development when I really dove into meditation. This is the sort of first set of meditations that I used around ethics, trying to be a good person all throughout the day. So what are the mechanics of that? Can I describe that system? And spoiler alert, it is probably not what you think. Probably not exactly what but there probably will be a little bit of surprise action going on there. So folks, if there are no questions, instructions, etc., about this meditation, if anyone doesn't have anything particular going on for them, I'll just make something up. But this is your last chance to put in your question or challenge or thing you're interested in before we kick it off. Allow me to adjust my seating posture. And for yourself, finding a place that you can, dealing with heat. I'm assuming you mean the crazy temperature, yeah. Exactly. Dealing with heat, that's a little tough because we have the AC in here. No, I can find that. Okay. So, beep, beep, up, up, up is finding a nice position that you can maintain for the duration of the sit, and then we will begin rocking and rolling. Excited, we have 2 videos coming out. One is our replay of the live stream, one replay of the live retreat that we did on Namarupa, and the other one is on how to turn your life into a retreat, how to do home retreat. So Alex Rainleaf, welcome. Nice to see you here from Portland, Oregon. Okay, so folks, we're going to be meditating for about 25 minutes, so finding a nice, comfortable posture you can maintain for the duration. And then we will begin. Okay. And we begin. Beginning by taking a few comfortable deep breaths and just feeling the body rise and fall. Each time we arrive at a meditation, we arrive with the momentum of all of the previous moments. If our mind was racing, rushing to get here, it's likely the mind is still moving at that speed. So for a moment, detecting the momentum of the mind. If this is challenging to do, we can simply observe some sense phenomena And notice what the mind does. This will tell us about the momentum of the mind in that particular moment. So the mind may be racy, or on the other hand, the mind might be spacey, foggy, drifting towards unconsciousness. So neither of these are problems, they're simply nature. And one way to not be pulled into the gravitational well of either raciness or spaciness is to observe the part of us that knows that experience rather than the experience itself. This would be the awareness of the experience. No matter what sense activity arises, if it is in our consciousness, if we come in contact with it, it is known by the mind. So this knowing quality is universal to all activity that we sense. It doesn't mean understanding. Known experientially. So at this moment, can we know we have body sensation? Can we know the difference between the body sensation and the part of the mind that's trying to understand it or get it? Trying to manage our experience. Perhaps noticing that, in this case, the experiencing of the body could be quite still or active. But this is not dependent on the speed or activity of the mind. The two could be in alignment or in contradiction. The mind could be bouncing all over the place, zipping from here to there, and the sensations of the body could be stable, continuous, or themselves quite active, flowing. So allowing the sensations of the body to come to the foreground, to be the center of our experiencing world. If we can detect emotion, allowing emotion to be known in this field of body sensations. We can ask the body a set of inquiry questions. What does a relaxed body feel like? What does a vibrant body feel like? What would billions and billions of years of evolutionary development in the form of a human body feel like? If we could feel billions of years of biological wisdom, what would that feel like right now? Again, the mind may answer and produce images or mental audio, but we're looking for one kind of answer, that which comes in the form of body sensation. the body could communicate a wisdom that would have the capacity to truly transform us, what would that feel like right now? If this same deep, radical wisdom could contact us in the form of human hearing, through the medium of billions of years of biological technology, what would that sound like? We may find there's a way of listening using awareness where the sensations of the body are part of the same mix, part of the same universe of sensing. This may or may not be noticeable or present. But if it is, just letting the two be with each other as we attend to hearing. What if hearing was the center of our universe? If hearing were the one true sense, and all the other sense activity were secondary to hearing. And if hearing and body sensation were really just one large category, what would that be like experientially? What if all of our sensing was one large category, including the seeing experience, either seeing the darkness of closed eyes, or experience of space, location, arrangement. Sensing experiences all occurring within a relatively simple range. The mind typically notices difference and separates them. Seeing if we can observe our sense experience in such a way, including our thoughts and emotions, that they're all slightly different voices within one larger choir. And we can listen to and zoom into one particular voice, or we can listen to the overall harmony. We notice the mind is more in the mood to separate things out, to divide them, showing us individual pieces rather than a collective whole. That's fine. That's natural. Simply observing that individual piece within the context of all of the other sense data. And once again, observing the movement and the general speed of the mind. It's changing shape. It's changing configuration as it comes in contact with a variety of sense data. There is the sense experience, and there is the knowing of it, the mind coming in contact. So if the body and mind were trying to show us a doorway, using the present moment, a doorway into the nature of existing, the body and mind wanted to show us about freedom, about abiding tranquility. And staying with the practice, staying in stillness, allowing a bit of light to enter the eyes, eventually allowing them to rest on a single point as they fully open. Feeling the momentum of the practice we've developed. And recognizing that how we relate to this particular moment, this shapes our whole experiential universe. This moment, right now. This is the great teacher. It shows us how we might inform, impact, and affect our lives. How we might allow our senses to guide us in every aspect of our life. Okay. So making any adjustments you need to allow the body to be comfortable. So what was that like? What happened and what are you like now? My leg is very asleep. So as we're preparing to describe our experience, or we're typing feverishly away, just know that it's quite impactful for me, it's helpful for me, but it's also quite helpful usually for people who can describe their own experience, what happened in that meditation. Often a particular practice is fortified by reporting it, talking about it, what occurred. So yeah, what was that like? Beautiful silver hair. What was that like? So in a moment, I'm going to jump in and talk a little bit about today's theme. And I want to go back and look at the exact question because I want to make sure that I have it accurately. So if you're joining us now, oof, got quite a sleepy leg going on. Okay, here we go. Here's the question as it arose in the questions for stream on our Discord, which I'm going to put our Discord in here. If you're unaware of how to get to our Discord, where is questions for stream? Questions, tech support, questions for stream. Okay, here we are. Janosch, you mentioned in the introduction, I think they mean introduction to one of our videos, section that you had a nurture. Oh no, I think it's sorry, introductions. It's on our Discord. We have a place where we do introductions. That I use a nurture positive practice where you did continuous tracking of personal moral traits. Can you explain more about exactly what the practice entails? Also interested to hear what your experience was like for you, what that experience was like for you, and also how other people would go about implementing it into their lives. So that's what we're going to talk about in terms of the theme. Great. Okay, we got some reports popping in here. Carl Q says, my concentration was scattered. Totally natural. I enjoyed playing with hearing, feeling, and feeling hearing, or just resting in awareness. Lovely, and that's one of the features that awareness has, is that it can cut across what we think about as very stable categories. This is sort of a skeleton key of meditation, is that the one of the natures of the mind is that it creates categories, and another part of the nature of the mind is that it breaks down categories. Let's see, 19860 says, there's a part where the sound and body sensations overlap. All right, there we go. A little bit of what I just described. It was hard for me to pay attention to this part and track both sound and body sensation at the same time. What to do? Well, in a way, that makes very good sense. In a way, it's like, you know, I can have flour and I can have water, or I could put the two together and make a mixture of the two, but it's hard for me to have all of those at the same time. It's like, yeah, that's that's exactly right. The mind can either break things down, or it can rather, the mind can either like clump things together, or it can break them down, break them into pieces. It can either, you know, it can break them down into separate things, or it can break down the edges and turn it into one thing. And that's typically the experience, is that it doesn't want to do both at the same time. I'm trying to think of an example. It's funny that I'm thinking of this as the example of this, because it's a little bit diagonal, but it's the example that's coming to mind right now. So I feel like until I get it out, it's gonna keep insisting that it's the example. But if you notice right now, it's hard to imagine the granular surface of the moon, the detail of the moon, and the distance of the moon at the same time. Let me see if I can. I haven't done this in a while. The two are sort of different functions of the mind. One is like the sort of detail, attention sort of occurring right here, imagining typically is experiences very close to us. And the other one is this thing that is by its nature trying to toss something far away off to the side. But that's not, we can't say that is that it's accurate. It doesn't know how far to toss it away. Or I don't think our mind has that kind of capability to toss something that far away. It's just sort of over there. But they're two different capacities of the mind. In the same way, the mind can divide, which my theory goes that it's using attention to divide and using awareness to cut across these boundaries. Awareness can just be aware of these different pieces cutting across different sections. So, I say that's my theory. That's not an uncommon theory. That's my experience. Let's see here. Will Alexander Bethany says, okay, so this is a re-report. I got that mole removed by my friend Kolpko. Good. He's a dermatologist. Said me Aunt Litmus while pointing at a dead mole next to me dug up a hole in the garden. Well, listen. If we take that at face value, it's it's very heartening, very helpful, and if we allow it to be abstraction, it's just fun. It's a good time to explore and have a good time. I think at some point I was like, I like really weird internet stuff, and so I don't know if Will Alexander's has an ongoing poetry stream here on our the Joy of Being Alive stream. So thank you for that contribution. Rory says it's interesting, not easy, to consider all sense data as a whole rather than separating here and see out. But I do get that it's all one. So what's a good very direct way to do this? So a very direct way to do this is, and to teach the system how to do this, is just detect a section of the body together. So you can detect the sensations of your hand. They're pretty distinct. You can notice this. You can move your hand and get some pretty clear data there, right? Now, if you can do this with your other hand too. Feel both of those sensations together as one sort of collective of sensation. That's breaking down the boundary of hand. If you want to do this in another way, this is a Namarupa exercise that I like to do with folks, but you hold your fingers with a distance between, a finger and the thumb, and the mind knows that there's a distance there. The mind knows there's a gap. That makes perfect sense. There's a gap there. The physical sensations don't know there's a gap. So if you just feel, it's actually a direct touch sensation from one to the next. There's no gap in touch sensation. And if it feels like there's a gap, that is largely because the mind is sort of predominating the perceptual experience at that point. It's not bad, it's just what's happening. So that's one way to sort of observe that the mind can break down these kind of distinctions, and then it's a matter of scale. Can we sort of go out from there and expand to include more material? These are zipping by. Thanks for all your comments, folks. It's really, it's good. It's helpful for me, and it's also, I think it's very interesting for other people to hear this stuff. Just got here, missed the meditation, but love a bit of chat. Well, Lewis, welcome here. Welcome to. This is the most important part. We're just winding up for the chat. So, Alex Rainleaf says, pleasant, increasing the sensation. The sense of appreciation for this, for the sense by understanding them as billion years old evolved technology. I feel increases the awe and enjoyment of using the senses, naturally boosting clarity. That is my experience too. That's actually the exact reason, one of the exact reasons I do it. It's also that I enjoy the awe that comes along with it. There's something that, this sounds very like mystical schmystical, but there is something about using an inquiry question to imbue the experience with either greater clarity or greater meaning. And so the questions we were looking at today was, if the body had something very significant to teach us, what would that feel like right now? And you notice I didn't ask you to feel something in particular, and so the thing I was hinting at, hopefully this came across, was that we don't need to change anything. We don't need to alter anything in order to have contact with that. I'd be curious what people's experience was with that in particular. We're using those particular inquiry questions, and how did that occur? We asked, what would a relaxed body feel like? What would a vibrant body feel like? What would a body feel like that was trying to show us this ancient technology? And I think that that's one of the things, that unfolds more, let's say, explicitly, or maybe not explicitly, but more easily, maybe, when people use psychedelics, for instance. It feels like their system is telling them or giving them some, piece of data or wisdom that is significant. And so that is part of what we're cultivating in this particular kind of meditation. Jamithicus says, I started to perceive the body as a big field of responsiveness. Okay, great. The body and body sensation and sound seemed similar in that they are little bits of arising and passing. Great. So arising and passing suchness. So there are different models, if folks are unaware, different models of how to. It's funny to think of like what is arising and passing, a model of how to do X. But so there are different models of perceiving sense data. We can break it down into specific little places. We can sort of lump it all together as one large experience. We're sort of doing a little of both of that today. We can also notice it as something which is coming into existence, right? This is the sort of new quality, the vibrant new nature of every present moment is experienced as brand new, as sort of a birth of reality for us in this particular moment. And in a subtle, if we can get to the subtlety of it, we can actually notice that in order for this present moment that we're experiencing now to exist, it has to be bracketed by the death or the non-existence of this other bright moment that was here a moment ago. So this moment is very bright and present. We can detect that. That makes perfect sense. We shake it off. Wait a second. Okay, what about this moment? Oh, there it is. It's so bright. It's present, etc. And typically the brightness of that newness is the thing that the mind will be drawn to because it's the most predominant. It's the most sort of noticeable, and the mind is almost universally, without training, drawn to the most predominant sensation. This is why if we get all whipped up into anger or resentment or something and it's predominant, the mind just can't get off of that loop. So training the mind to notice subtlety is one of the ways that we train the mind to break free of those kind of feedback loops. And we can train the mind to notice the collapsing of particular experiences. So I can make a sound with my hands by putting them together very quickly, right? But notice that sound, we already, there's a sense that it will come. There's an imagining of the sound, having heard it many times. The mind is producing mental audio right now. That is also present. The sound will come and then it'll disappear. So we can listen to the sound appear and we can listen to it disappear. And its absence is palpable. And if we can train the system enough to notice the arising, which is very common, most of meditation is focused on the arising, but also the passing away, really focusing on that passing away, the breaking down of sense data into sort of falling out of consciousness. That's one model of starting to see the nature and the structure that the mind is using in order to produce this world around us. So that's one model. Another model is to simply observe all of the sensations sort of coagulating and decoagulating. In a way, it's like arising and passing is sort of like existing, not existing. Whereas there's another model, which is not better or worse. It's just different model, which is significant. It's also a fully functional model, is to notice the different pressures and forces pushing and pulling, creating and forming reality. That we have senses that seem, very dense at a particular moment, and then there's experiences that feel very ethereal in the next moment, and the two are pretty dependent on each other. In order to be able to detect, I'm clenching my fist, the sensations of a clenched fist, there has to be the absence of those sensations everywhere else. That's the nature of how the mind detects. It's through contrast. And so if we can watch that pushing and pulling, the whole system is sort of being created and reality is being produced and disintegrated simultaneously, continuously. And this is more of an expansion-contraction model. I've heard, this is what Shinzen says, is that the critique of the arising and passing model is that, or a critique is that it can fortify a self that is experiencing this. And often it arising and passing can be very external, and then it can, often the dark night experience is when it sort of penetrates in to actually hit that particular self. Or maybe that's not accurate. That's not my experience. My experience is actually that the dark night material happens when the arising and passing experience comes in contact with the self, but it's unconscious. And only when that becomes conscious is that can I work through that? Can that material be broken down to notice that the self is just made of the same exact material? Okay, so that was a long little diatribe. Okay, so suchness. Okay, Gemithicus goes on to say, an inquiry I always enjoyed. Where is the boundary between hearing and feeling, or between seeing and tasting? Yeah, that's actually interesting, is to ask where's the boundary between the two, because that will inherently break down the edge. And that's one of the practices that I like to do is you sort of look for the edge. Okay, the mind will tell us, yeah, of course these are different, and look at that edge and soak that edge with acceptance, and the edge will often just melt away between the two. Beautiful silver hair. My dog decided she just had to come lay at my feet and go to sleep while I was meditating. That was a bit distracting. And so that's a couple things. One, we can approach a distraction from several layers. One is just from the layer of like, okay, this is pulling the mind in a certain way, and this momentum that I was detecting around the meditation has now collapsed and turned into a different sort of experience that's unfolding in this way. And to look for preferring in the system. I really prefer this and not that. Recognizing that the preferring itself is natural. It's natural for the system to have clinging and aversion. And really our goal is not to get rid of those things. It's actually to recognize them as other shapes pushing and pulling within our sensory field. Scott Nesbin says, I felt like all the senses were flowing together when focusing outward, but it was more difficult with emotion. And that's just what it is for you today. That happens to be the case. The way that Shinzen described this to me was that there's often we can prefer one or the other. We can prefer everything's flowing, and that is clearly a sign of progress. Or we don't want to have this sort of ordinary, coagulated, organized sense of self. And his critique, this is not critique of you, this was his critique of the way I was approaching it, so maybe you can identify with this, is that I would prefer the more psychedelic material. And he was like, it's just the same material, just organized differently. And he said you need to stop preferring. I think that that's partially true. I think another way to look at it is to recognize the preferring as just more of the same material organized in a different shape. It's the system in the shape of preferring. So that can actually be a nice way to sort of cut through the non-transcendent nature of non-transcendence of to cut through the ordinary nature of ordinariness, is to recognize that it's the same material as the sort of flowing deconstructed universe, but it's in the shape of something that is more organized at this particular moment. That, my friends, is an exciting way to cut through non-meditation material. Okay, so we discuss the sort of fabric of our sensory deconstruction, but I also want to discuss this other part of our practice, which is morality. And this is what the question was that came in earlier. What is the practice that I personally used to investigate my moral experience moment by moment all throughout the day, and continuing that out. So I did that practice very rigorously for probably 5 years, and then it sort of became more of a background practice. I would say maybe more like 7 years, and then it became a background practice, but it's still something that's so much part of the fiber of my life and the way that I perceive and look at the world that it's really an ongoing practice, something I do pretty continuously. So here's the catch, or here's the thing that might be surprising to some folks, is that that particular practice that I'm describing isn't a standard Western meditation practice. It's actually, its origins are Protestant, and its origins come from a period in American history. I'm sure this was happening in other places, but this in particular comes from American history, where people were basically recognizing that morality was a valuable pursuit in and of itself in the 20s and 30s. And they started these clubs, one of which was called the Oxford Club. And the Oxford Club was a place where it was sort of like a moral club, and you came and talked about, how you could be a better person in places where you've had difficulties and trying to move yourself towards, in this case, it was towards God. It was towards the sort of ideal visage of, a God or a higher power, this kind of thing. I don't personally have a super strong need for belief one way or the other. I used to be like really staunch, like I don't believe and that's my identity, and then I realized that that was just another form of the same material. So I don't feel like I need to defend non-believing or belief, and I find that sometimes belief is useful. So sometimes I believe in the experience of a God, and sometimes that poof disappears, and that flow back and forth will change, in the course of a day. So I just feel less, in a way it's like feeling comfortable with your sexuality or something. I just feel comfortable with my, belief and agnosticism oscillating back and forth. So the Oxford group is a moral club, and what they found, which is very sort of strange and interesting, was that people who used this system, it actually broke down various addictive habits. Because they saw a lot of those habits as moral failings. So in particular, this is back in the 20s and 30s, the idea of someone being a drug addict or like an alcoholic or something like this, it was not the way we think of it now. It was very, very different. It was much more that you are a bad person. Like you're just, if we think about it today, it's like someone who is like violent or like is a racist or it's like, you're just a bad person. Like, why are you doing that? That's just bad. Sure, why don't you just drink like a normal person? So that was what it was. It was a moral failing, and they found, not surprisingly, that somehow this moral work actually affected people's ability to stop using substances, even if they've been using them really extensively, meaning like they're actually past the point of like recreation. They're now on the point of like full-blown addiction. Again, addiction and alcoholism were not terms. They didn't even exist. There wasn't really like a, if you were an alcoholic at that time, and again, it's like drugs were just less talked about. So that's, but if you were like a drug addict or alcoholic, like a, real deal one that couldn't stop, they would just lock you up. Like you're just a mental case and they can't do anything with you, so they just put you in a mental asylum because there's nothing that can be done. And this is very real. Imagine, we all probably know someone who's an alcoholic in our lives, and imagine if, well, what are you going to do? Jane or Jimmy or whoever has been, they can't stop drinking, they're really messing up their lives. We're going to put them in an asylum for life, like they're just going to be under lock and key. Maybe we'll let them out sometime, but we'll just see what happens. Hopefully they can drink like an ordinary person. And today we know that that's not necessarily the best idea. Although, do we know that now that I think of it? Because we seem to actually take people who have addiction problems and then put them in prison. So, okay, things haven't changed that much. So that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. So that's really the case. So these moral clubs worked very, very well. And what happened was, the people who are involved in these clubs, they're sort of groups of people, and one of the groups was the people who are recovering from drugs and alcohol and sort of these things, and they sort of started to make their own sort of little group, and they would meet to just talk about their own difficulties with substances, etc. But the whole premise was they were talking about it in the context of these moral principles, and they would have a set of things that they would do that would piece by piece sort of deconstruct the immoral self, the self that is, self-absorbed and, selfish, dishonest, arrogant, inconsiderate, judgmental. These moral characteristics that, I don't know if everybody, but many people would probably say these are not ideal. This is not what I'd ideally like to do. So they would get together and talk about their own experiences and talk about their, moral difficulties and systematically deconstruct those difficulties. This is, and people really don't know this, and if this is surprising to you, it's probably surprising to most people. This is the foundational element. This is the structural core of what 12-step recovery is. This moment I'm talking about in history is the precursor to the creation of this group of people who didn't want to be named. So they, they just said, look, we're alcoholics. We don't want to be named by anything. This is the identity that we're going to use in order to manage this is just Alcoholics Anonymous. And so my experience was that, 16 or so years ago, again, I want to be very clear here that I'm not saying which 12-step fellowship I belong to, right? So my background is I've used drugs, I've used alcohol, I've had challenges with eating at different times in my life. I've had challenges with finance, and there's 12-step recovery groups for all of these things and way more. There's hundreds. There's ones for people who are hoarders and ones, any of these sort of addictions that we can engage with, they're available. So I'm talking about the history, which started with Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm not saying that I am in that program. And this is it's important that folks know that that's part of the tradition, is you don't publicly say you belong to any one of these groups, because that's not there's two words in the name of these different organizations, and one of them is the thing that they're struggling with, and the other one is how they're going to relate to the world. So that's an important factor here. So that's the general breakdown. So we're now talking about, it's the year 2004. I am, my life is effectively crushed by my own sort of decisions that I've made, actions that I've taken, and things that were outside of my personal control. So the question is, what do I do? Well, I reach out for help. My family has a history of being involved in various 12-step programs, and I said, I'm at the end of my rope. I'm either going down full self-destruction, or I need some sort of something. I didn't know what that was. I had no idea about this whole history thing and these like bits and pieces. I just needed some kind of help. And then I discovered, when I entered into one of these 12-step communities, that this is what they do. That actually, they basically stop talking about the substance or challenge very quickly, and they start talking about being a good person. The first thing they say is, do you have a problem? That's if we talk about the 12 steps, that's the first one, is like, do you have a problem? Do you recognize that you've lost the ability to manage this situation? And some people can manage it, and for them they answer, no, that's not my experience. And then it's sort of like, okay, cool, then go ahead and manage it. Then you have the skill to do that. If you don't, then this might be an option for you. So this is, if just fun fact, this is where Raquel and I met. This is sort of where, if you listen to our story, it's like, so wait, you were 25 and she was 15 and you were friends. It's like, this is a weird, so it's like, it's always this weird thing where it's like, yeah, we knew each other. We were in the same sort of, we find ourselves in the same room once a week, or, a few times a week. It was just funny. That's how we met. So, and we were friends for many years and supportive of each other in a community of support. And then, at some point we became romantic many years later. So, the first basic thing is, okay, do you have a problem? The second one is it possible that there is a world bigger than the one you're looking at, that you have a perspective here, and that actually there's more to the world? I'm giving a very vague description of how the steps function. The second step is it possible there could be some other answer other than the one that your mind has told you is the answer? And typically the answer is like, yes. And then it comes into this contact with, God or higher power, etc. And I just want to emphasize here, I work with people who are atheist. I'm atheist part-time. I think Raquel's like a complete non-believer. Like, when we hear this term, we just want to have a little flexibility, because the concept was actually around a higher power, so it's something bigger than ourselves. The group of people who are supporting us could be a higher power, the ocean, whatever. It can be whatever we want. So people get all hung up, but they're getting hung up in an argument that is not happening in that particular situation. So that's something that happens. So the steps then move you on to say, are you willing to turn your will and your life over to whatever you consider this bigger thing that you can lean your life towards? So for me, if people are interested in that as like a deity or some force, right? And it's also possible, and I fully support this, that people would say like, I have that force within me, or I can develop that force within me, and that would be the thing that I rely on, this part of me that has a greater sense of what's sort of valuable and important in being a human being. Totally fine. But are you willing to turn your entire thing over to that experience or being or force or whatever it is? Are you willing to turn your whole thing over to that? That's where you get into the third step. And in the second step, you're sort of defining what that thing would be. And a great way to define that, PS, if it's of interest, and again, it's like you don't have to believe in something, but it can be an excellent exercise. What I'll do with people is I'll say, write down a list of all the adjectives that an ideal higher power, whatever that is for you, would not be. So not selfish, not fearful, not rude, not unkind. Like, write a list of those, okay? Get real clear on that list. Then write the opposite of each one of those words. Okay, so it's like unkind, kind. It's like erratic. The other one is stable. Whatever it would be for you. The opposite adjective here. And fun fact, little caveat here. I remember once I was early in recovery, and I was like, I don't know about this whole higher power thing. I don't mean, it's just like this whole. It feels like God is like erratic and angry and violent and like dismissive of me, and just like I just can't count on them, and like when they show up it's like blah, like whatever. And my therapist, who is very astute, was like, it sounds like you're talking about your father. So that's often the case, is that people are having a fight that doesn't belong in that sort of context. So I thought that was very funny. So a list of these sort of adjectives that's not, write down the opposite, cross off the first list, and then when you take time to pray, and prayer is just a nurture positive meditation. You're just saying, like, may I be peaceful, or please guide me to be kind to other people, etc. So when you have contact with this higher power, that's what you're keeping in mind, this being that is kind or gentle or considerate, and you have your list based on the opposites. It's the 12-step paradigm is very much based on the idea of finding a positive through eliminating the negatives. So I'll get a little bit more clear about what's it called, that in a minute. Someone's asking, what was the adjective bit again? I zoned out. So very briefly, a list of adjectives that an ideal higher power is not. Listing those out. Then writing the opposite adjective, right? Not worrying about where it's going, what the next step is, just writing the opposite adjective for each one, crossing out the first list, and then when you pray or try to manifest, or whatever way you want to describe it, have contact with emptiness. These are the qualities that you're keeping in mind to some degree when you're looking for your true self, or however you want to describe it. Those are the qualities that you're leaning towards. So right now we've gone through the first 3 steps. The fourth step is central in this process, and it's a really central tool in 12-step process. It's, if you know anyone who's in 12-step process and you mention the fourth step, they're like, oh yeah, this is a lot of hard work. So that is called, the fourth step is a fearless searching, and we made a fearless and searching moral inventory of ourselves. So that is, it's pretty powerful, and anyone can do this, and I wish that everyone would, because it's a pretty powerful process. We take our lives and we go through all the way from our entire life. Right? You can start in kindergarten or wherever you want to start, wherever your memory starts, and you write down resentments. People that you've had a resentment towards. Now, maybe right now you sort of feel a little neutral, but you had a resentment towards them, so you write those suckers down. And the format is, I can get into the specifics, and people have done it different ways, but the format is basically you take a notebook, 2 pages, on one column, you just write names, skip 3 lines, next name, skip 3 lines, next name, skip 3 lines. So you have this notebook where the left side of the page is just has names, and it's the whole thing is just full of names. Maybe it's 3 notebooks. It's different for different people. It's also helpful to know that typically you do this with someone else, because if you could do this alone, this is the kind of work that really requires support. And this is one of the things that's really important about recovery in general. But if 12-step is sort of structured around this, is that if we could have done it alone, we would have done it a long time ago. Uh, Little history note. So there was something called the Washingtonians, which is strangely it was in Lincoln's time, and one of Lincoln's addresses to the Washingtonians. They were a group of people who discovered that if they talked to each other about their, in this case it was alcoholism, they just didn't drink, which for at a certain level of alcoholism is insane. Not drinking is crazy, improbable. These two guys were at a bar one night and they just started talking about their problems, and they didn't drink that night. And so they did it again. They talked about their problems and they didn't drink. And so it's been known in history that if people talk to each other about their personal challenges that they cannot move through, they can often do something that they could not do alone. So hence you get into this realm of like, is there some higher power? Or maybe the higher power is the relationship between the people, but it is something more than our individual selves. So again, all this work requires some sort of support or connection with somebody else. So that's generally what I would say, whether it's with a therapist or whatever, whoever you're working with, someone who can hear you and hear what you're saying without judgment. So you have this big list of resentments. You then go through and write everything that's affected in your life. And there's a list of sort of which things, like financially, emotionally, relationships, affected my, there's a whole list. Affected my securities, affected my self-esteem, these sort of things. As you go through and you write, okay, so it's like resentment one, and it sounds like a lot of work because it is a lot of work. Resentment one, Jimmy, and then you say what they did, stole my cookie, and then you say what did it affect? It affected my, trust and my, relations and my finances. Great. So you go through all of the names and do this process. So you have this big list, and by this point, it's kind of driving you crazy. It's like your entire life, your entire mind is all of these resentments. And part of the exercise is recognizing that these resentments are alive. They are active in our experience of the world, even if they seem like they're not alive in any particular moment. But they are very much shaping the way we relate to the world. Then you go through, and this is the kicker, and I'm a little hesitant to even say this, because typically when somebody goes through this process, you don't tell them about this part. In part because it's the relieving part, and you want them to get so clearly embedded in the resentment side that it's just like, Jesus Christ, I need some relief. I need something to break free from this. And this part is often the part that people is very misunderstood, or this kind of thing. So in our lives, this is the way I'll describe it. We have things are happening to us. We have certain, experiences. So let's say someone does something unkind to us. They steal our cookie. Well, of that experience, of all of the things that happened, maybe 99% of it was their action, right? And 1% of it is my fault or my doing, right? Maybe I bragged and was like, look at my delicious cookies, right? And then I left them down and I went away. Now, no one is saying that the action and responsibility that is someone else's action doesn't belong to them. But what we are saying is this 1% that is my doing, that is my responsibility, my part, as it's called, is the only thing that I have the ability to affect. So what I can do is look at that as though it were 100% and then move from there. So again, we're not saying that somebody were abused as a child, that they need to take that on themselves. And actually, that's one of the cases where you don't really have a part. If it's, childhood abuse, it's like you don't have a part there. But the premise is every other resentment, you have some part, even if the part is only the fact that you're holding on to it still. I remember when I was, before I stopped drinking, before I stopped using substances, I got into a fight. Now I pride myself as a pacifist, always have, and I wasn't, fighting back. I kept like blocking whatever, and this person was kept hitting me, and I was like, trying to whatever, and I was trying to be like, hey, look, I'm not fighting you, I'm not whatever. But it was this like really crappy scuffle. Like it was this awful, and like this thing, and they were like kicking me, and I was blocking, but it was hurting their shin and whatever. It's just like really gross. This kind of thing like happens when you're like in your early 20s and you have a problem with, substances, whatever. It was just awful. And I racked my brains, like, what is my part? Like, what did I do to create this situation? And now I can think of a dozen things. But at the time, I was like, I don't know, man. I was sitting there, I was like just blocking. I was saying, like, leave me alone, like, whatever. And then at some point I realized I could run faster than this guy. I could run faster than this guy. I have to own that. I could have run away, and this wouldn't have happened. And so what happens is it's incredibly empowering to observe that one little place where I could have had an effect. Now, it's not to beat myself up and say, oh, what's wrong with me? I should have done X, Y, and Z. No, very different than that. Okay, if ever in a situation like that again, I could run away. I don't have to be like, I have the right to stand on this street corner and you can't. It's like I could have exited the situation. So it's looking for that kernel. That is like the key. And that structure of I feel resentment or I feel upset, what is the thing that I have contributed to this situation? And then trying to work on that is the core of how this moral sort of continuous moral practice works. So we have a list of places that are ways that our part sort of existed. So selfish, arrogant, dishonest, inconsiderate, meaning I didn't consider someone else's perspective or I didn't consider something, judgmental, and expectations. This is an expanded list, but that's a rough list. Some people go very extensive with this long list of character defenses. So by looking at those, I just say, okay, here's the person. Jimmy stole my cookie. What was my part? I was, arrogant, let's say, because I was like, look at I'm the cookie master or whatever, just arrogant about my cookies. So I now have this list. And so I basically cross off the whole section of the list. And now I just have this place where I've been, selfish, dishonest, arrogant, inconsiderate, etc. And so what you do after that process is first you read through the entire list with somebody, which is the 5th step. But then 6 and 7 in the step process, every day you wake up and you look at the list and you say, how today can I not be selfish, arrogant, dishonest, inconsiderate? You look at that. And then at the end of the day, we're now jumping all the way up to like the 10th step. At the end of the day, you write down, hey, how did I do today? And it's, yes, a lot of work, but it's very, very powerful to deconstruct the ways that we are acting outside of the values that are important to us. So we have certain values and we act in ways that are not in line with those. How can we actually really see that on a granular level? And one of the amazing things about, at least in the community that I was involved in 12-step, was that but one of the first things when you come in, they're like, we don't lie anymore. No more lying of any kind. And I think most people say like, yeah, I'm a pretty honest person. That's no problem. But I definitely have this thing of like, well, white lies don't count. Like I could tell someone I heard of a band. I mean, what's the harm? Yeah, I know those. I've heard of those guys. I can't remember exactly, but yeah, I've heard of them. Or like my boss is like, did you do this task? And he doesn't, I can just go flip a switch and I've done the task and I can say, oh yeah, I did that. And he won't know. Those things are fine. And I also have this sense that like, I don't steal, but I could steal from corporations. If there's like some corporation and they have some thing and they send me 2 copies of a thing and like, that doesn't matter. That's like that, it's 6 one way, half a dozen the other. They're never going to know. And part of the premise is that we try to live as close to our ideals, not because it will have a positive or negative effect, etc. It's because we should, or rather, there is great benefit for us. And so just that one piece of not lying, because I was, 20-something-year-old person, insecure, as more insecure than I am now, somehow. And I would lie all the time. I'd just be like, yeah, I've heard of that thing. Like, oh, I'm sorry I couldn't make it to that thing. I'm really busy, or like whatever. And all of a sudden I was asked to stop, and that itself was incredibly significant. So that's the general breakdown. The final piece of, if we skip some of the steps around making restitution and these kind of things, but the final piece is that, and this is what would be the 12th step, is that we practice these principles in all of our affairs, and we try to help somebody else through this process. That's it. You're not recruiting people. These are people who really want help, and you say, cool, I'll walk you through this process. Someone walk me through it. That's the structure. And so I was sort of, I would just say like vehemently dedicated to this, not like an evangelist, but just like, really, really taking care and really being with other people who shared the same values. And that was such a significant sort of life-shaping thing. That was probably, I'm trying to think. So there's probably just a few life-shaping things in my life. One is my exploration in fine art, right? The other one is this, what I'm talking about, this sort of moral relationship to the world, or I mean, really, it's like we're talking about like living within the principles that are outlined in 12-step. And then the third is meditation. And those things have been the most impactful sort of structural pieces of my entire life. And so that's generally the breakdown. That's how that moral work sort of has affected me and has shaped my life. And without that work, I wouldn't have the meditation. No way. I mean, honestly, I probably would have either died or committed suicide or ended up in jail or I mean, basically, it's one of the things about drinking is you don't know. I mean, I remember waking up once, rainbowed over a trash can in the Bronx, and it's like, I don't know anybody in the Bronx. Like this is why our prisons are full of people who are alcoholics, is that they didn't mean to get mad enough to like pull a trigger or like push somebody or whatever these things that people do. But if you look, like 70-80% of the people who are in prison, they committed their crime or did the thing while they're inebriated. So that's I have no idea what my life would be like. Maybe I'd just be a sad, lonely person. So I wouldn't have the meditation. I wouldn't have had the capacity to do it. I wouldn't have in a way, the willingness to do it, because the pain, like it was because I wanted to get away from the pain. There's a saying this is from some, preacher or some clergyman that is quoted in 12-step, that they say, if I ever make it to heaven, it's going to be from backing away from hell. And that's the general premise, is we move away from the things that are harming us in a very detailed way, and that creates a life that is very rich. So I wouldn't be married. I wouldn't have my business. I wouldn't have my lovely home. I wouldn't have my relationship with my family. All of these things, if it weren't for this really, rudimentary foundational element. So that is my story. That is hopefully helpful to you and hopefully of interest. And I'm trying to think if there are any relevant links that I can include in the playback below. But that's generally it. So thank you for listening to that long and stretched out story. So I'd be curious from you, what are your thoughts? What's your experience? Be curious. What is that like? That strange occurrence that is my life. It's also weird because usually don't talk about this stuff, and people, it's weird because you're actually, like I said, it's okay to talk about your experience there. The general request is you do not identify which program you belong to, because you then become a representative of that program. And you'll notice that famous people will say, oh, I'm a member of this program, or a member of that program, and I really love it. And it's like, yeah, I don't think you read too far in, because they're pretty clear, it's not like deep buried in the, esoteric parts of like, don't do that. In fact, it's not even like buried deep, it's in the goddamn name. So it's like, come on, people. Oh, Scott Nesbin, I forgot that was your question. Great, I'm glad that it was helpful and interesting. It's so wonderful you did that in your 20s. Yeah, that was, I'm glad that I did. And it was, it's also that, interestingly, like all of this stuff is extremely accessible now, because it used to be a thing where if someone was in the middle of the country, they had no access to the, groups or the things that, meet in New York City, which in, New York City, there are thousands of these meetings every week, because there's such a high population, and it's also a lot of this material formed here. So New York is a pretty central historical location for the 12-step stuff. So, yeah, that's the general breakdown. And also, P.S. if anyone, like privately, I can talk to you about any details at all. So if anyone has any questions or challenges or this kind of thing, feel free to drop me a line and I can share more personal detail. So Carl says, thank you so much. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for listening. Rebecca from Sunnybrook Farm says, thank you so much. So nice to know, to get to know you. So nice to get to know you makes me trust you more. Okay, excellent. Well, I appreciate that very much. I try to be as open as I can. Stopping lying and stealing were major. Yeah, it's crazy how, honestly, it's such a small thing, and it makes me really wonder, because I'll have jobs. I remember having a job with someone, and I was working. This is back when I was, I would do all these random odd jobs just to like survive. And New York, especially early in your career living in New York, usually people are like just doing any weird odd job, and you have all these stories of weird odd jobs. And one of them was doing high-end painting inside homes, green painting, doing whatever. So I worked for this guy, and he's like, you got to be there at this time because blah blah blah, it's really important, and blah blah blah. And I would get there and I'd be like, wait, I'm the only one here. This is so weird. I wonder if did something go wrong? And I'll text the guys like, hey, listen, I want to make sure everything's okay. And then at some point I was like, it was very strange. It just didn't make any sense. And all of a sudden I realized he's lying. He was lying to get me to come to work early. And there was no thing, there was no reason, and he wouldn't answer. He's being very dodgy. And I was like, because if he said, hey, come to work early, I probably would have said, no, I'm good, And I was like, that's so weird. He's lying. And like in my relationship with Raquel, we couldn't survive if we lied. I mean, I hear about these, and of course, I mean, couples have secrets and these kind of things, and then usually that's where a lot of the tension comes in. So it's like no judgment, but my relationship with Raquel is so fundamentally based on being really, really honest. Even if it's like, I can't talk about this right now, it's like too overwhelming, and then we talk about it later, but we have no secrets from each other. So there's that. Yes, those are major. Alex Rainleaf, well, thank you for enjoying. And of course, Scott Nesbitt, thank you for asking the question. Again, Scott Nesbitt asked one question on our Discord, which was, this question. I just spent, 30 minutes answering it. So if you have a question of any kind, not just about my sordid past, ask it on our Discord. I'll put it back in the chat right now. And your question will be answered at length. There's a channel in there called Questions for Stream. And then so 19860 says, wowza, yeah, thanks for sharing, Ganesh. I learned way more than I expected to learn. I joined the stream today just intending to get my meditation in and am going to leave contemplating how to live more ethically. Well, okay, I just want to say one thing on that. I think it's partially because this is central to Raquel and my experience of the world. This is central to the way we relate to the world. But I want to give this example. So we teach people meditation. We teach people also some people the path of awakening. People who are interested in that. Not everybody is interested in that. People who are, we teach that to them. People who do this kind of work first, who are often our friends who are involved in 12-step, this kind of thing, and they're like, hey, will you teach me? Yeah, sure, I'll teach you. It's not an exaggeration to say they move so quickly into the awakening material, much more than anybody else usually. Sometimes there's a random person who just sort of whizzes through. But this is the background and nature of Buddhism. They'll say you have to really perfect your ethics, and that will clear the path for you to have a deeper awakening experience. That was my experience. I really, really focused on this stuff for, nearly a decade. Of course, there's a lot of overlap with meditation, etc. But when I really decided to dig into the meditation, things happened so quickly for me. And I was, okay, that's just, I'm a fluke. This is just sort of what it is. But then I noticed things happened very quickly for Raquel. Things happened very quickly for students who would come in who, were like interested in this stuff. So ethics are so central to the path of awakening and this sort of deep transformation, and Buddhism is pretty clear about that. So when people separate them out and say, well, I just want to experience awakening and I'm not so concerned about this, it's sort of a silly venture. I had one student who was, I don't want to say I think he was somewhere on the spectrum of being a sociopath. Very nice person, very sweet guy, he's very sweet guy. But he didn't care about anyone. He was like, people are just blobs of meat. You could murder them or not. Like, he's like, I don't care. I'm not going to do that because I know that's bad, or people have told me that's bad, but I don't really care about anybody, and I just want to experience awakening, and then I can just be free. And I was like, it's not really like that. And plus, we talk mostly about fulfillment more than we do talk about like a cool experience where you'll have a psychedelic sort of rewriting of your sense data. What life do you want after awakening is really the question we try to answer and help people answer. And I was like, listen, we're going to start with some ethics. We're going to start with doing a little bit of practice around compassion. I want you to be able to start to detect your own emotions and other people's emotions. That's called empathy. And how we're going to do that is, and this person was financially very stable. I said, we're going to have you give away $1 every day. You're going to take $1, you're going to give it away, and you're going to see how you feel. Sometimes it'll feel good, sometimes it'll feel neutral, sometimes it'll feel bad because the person will snatch the $1 and be like, you should have given me more. Right? It doesn't matter, but just to notice what occurs when that happens. And he was like, no, I just want awakening. I quit. I was like, cool, man. And so that was that. So for me, there's a very strong link between the path of awakening and the path of ethics. So thank you so much for sharing that. 19860. Everybody, I have a wish for you today. First is to let you know that we're going to be back here in fewer than 72 hours. Back here having fun, answering your question, meditating, having a good old time. My wish for you is that today, in fact right now, that you're able to simply contact the lovely experience of being a living human body mind, a very rare experience, one that you will not have forever, at least if all of our science is to be believed. We don't get this experience continuously. So to appreciate the existent quality that you're in contact with right now, and to know that the decisions you make in this particular moment are going to shape what happens in the next moment. This is, in Buddhism, what's called karma. The decisions you make now will shape the next moment. The decisions you've made in the past have shaped this moment. So how in this moment can you be kind, gentle, honest? How might you be of help to other people, of service? And to consider for the rest of the day, in what way could you be of support to those around you, with less of a concern of how it will affect or make you feel, and more of an impact on how it might help, how it might be of service, how it might be of contribution to the world. Okay, folks, very looking forward to seeing everyone soon, seeing folks in the very near future here, and have fun, practice well, take care of each other, and we look forward to seeing you all soon.